It truly is my honor to be here this morning, and I need to give you guys a huge thank you. You know, when God's at work, it's pretty amazing the way things come together. I didn't expect to be preaching anywhere or going out and sharing God's Word. I've done it for several years, and the last few years have been a little dry. I've been focused on the business and just getting involved in the business community as a young leader, and so didn't really have too many opportunities to preach outside of the one-on-one evangelism that occurs, just being who I am. And so Roger, who is one of the managers down at the Murrieta location, had seen me speak at a chamber function and said, "Hey, I know you love Jesus. I could tell by what you were talking about." And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, we'd love to have you come speak." So it was an amazing opportunity. The people were so receptive. God just showed up, and it was awesome. I was very, very thankful. So hopefully we have a repeat of the same. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, working for Sunset One Escrow does not qualify me to stand here, first off. At the age of 5, my parents were divorced. And I don't remember too much of life with my father. I remember later on as I was older. I don't remember the specifics of when they got divorced. I just knew life was different. And if it weren't for grandparents who are like second parents to me, I don't know where I would have been today. And so at 5, a lot of turmoil within the family. And so my mother had gotten plugged into church. And she kind of spent her life not like, there was an acknowledgement of God, but there wasn't any emphasis placed on, okay, you need to go to church or you need to do this. It was, okay, if you're happy and you're a good person, then you're okay. And she kind of flirted with some of the other different religions and didn't really settle on any of them. And she had met Jesus. And so she wanted to make sure her children met Jesus. And so at a little church in Manhattan Beach, on a Sunday morning, my sister and I were there in service with her, and they, at the end of service, had an altar call. And at 5 years old, I knew. I said, I need Jesus. I know there's something here. And I understood what was going on and what was being asked of me. So I use that as an encouragement. I have 3 children of my own. You know, it says in Joel that in those last days, God's going to pour out His Spirit on all flesh, and that the young children are going to prophesy. Do not discredit or discount your 5 or 4-year-olds who come to you and say, I want Jesus. They know what they're looking for. They know what they need. You know, a lot of times we want to, oh, no, they're not ready. They don't understand. No, they do understand. So life continues to move on. In between, my mother had made a decision, and that decision ended up affecting her children. And we had about 5 years of turmoil. There was abuse in the home. There was a lot of uncertainty of what was going to happen. And then at 10, God once again showed up dramatically and brought my stepfather into my life. And into my mother's life, a husband, one who would treat her right. And so, funny how it happened is my mother had gone to our pastor and she said, look, my son, his father isn't really involved in his life. He really needs a male role model, though, so that I don't lose him to, you know, gangs, drugs, and alcohol, and all the other craziness I see some of the other kids go through. And so she went to the pastor, and the pastor said, well, I got a couple of guys in mind. And one of the guys I already knew from youth group, so I knew him. Kind of a quirky guy. He was really nice, though, but kind of quirky and just weird. And then there's this other guy. And what got me hooked is this other guy had been a backpacker, a mountain climber, and a rock climber. And he just moved back from Arizona. Well, I love the outdoors. We lived inland in San Diego, so I spent my free time in the backyard running around, or climbing up mountains, or anything to imperil my life. That's pretty much what I would do in the outdoors. And so along comes this guy, and I'm thinking, this is fantastic. So the first place we go to is A16, a backpacking store. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm going, wow, this is awesome. Perfect. We go out a couple of times, and then one afternoon, we were hanging out. And then we go back, he goes back to drop me off, and I run upstairs real quick to get something to show him, and I come back down, and he's holding hands with my mom. And I'm thinking, what's going on? And I remember at like 9.5 years old, just flipping out. I started bawling, I'm upset, I'm angry, and I'm going, you're taking my brother from me. You're taking my big brother. And my mom kind of laughs, and she goes, no, you don't understand. He's going to be here all the time now. We're getting married. Oh. What had happened is God had shown up, and their first meeting, God had already told them, you're meant for each other. Get married. So life then kind of stabilizes a little bit. Now, we still had our issues. We still had things that my father had to endure, that not having any children of his own and marrying into a family with pseudo-teenagers, we did not make it easy on him. But the one thing that impacted and changed my life the most is that my father had come into the picture as a man who'd gone to Bible college, had amazing experiences with Christ, and he was not going to let us miss life with Jesus. And so he said, I don't care about anything else. Sunday morning we go to church as a family. I don't care if you're tired, I don't care if you're sick, I don't care if you're throwing up. That's what we do on Sundays. You can do whatever you want to the other 6 days of the week, but we go as a family on Sundays. All right, not a big deal. We've been going to church anyway. So then, as I'm getting plugged in, I'm discovering I like these kids. You know, I kind of like this little church thing. Well, life doesn't just stay static. You know, in between all of this, there were always the enticements. There were the gangs where I lived. You know, there was that feeling of, okay, I'm somebody, I'm valued as someone, I got protection, no one's going to mess with me. Do I do this? There was always the kids who were doing drugs. You know, the tendency to want to escape, especially when things got rough, yeah, that's pretty appealing. But in the middle of all these changes and all of these things going on, I always had my anchor. Because early on in life, my mother had made a decision. And she said, no, my children are going to know you. And God honored that. You know, my wife is the single greatest thing that's ever happened to me. We've been married 11 years this year. We have 3 children. They're 10, 8, and 6. And I would not be where I am today without her support, her love, and her encouragement, and her prodding and kicking out the door at times. She has a testimony that would make you cry. I mean, the things that she's gone through and experienced, the way Jesus showed up, I mean, it's what you hear about all the time. And so, you know, I love telling my wife's testimony because it's the attention getter. It's the, wow, man, God really is real when you hear it. And then they come to mind, I'm like, I don't have a testimony. You kidding me? I've lived in church my whole life. Like, what do you want to hear from me? And so this had been, the opportunity came up, my wife was sharing her testimony within the church, and our friend who's the worship leader, he was a former Special Forces Marine, and so he had an amazing testimony too, and you know, we're surrounded with all these people. And I kind of feel like, you guys know who Tim Hawkins is? You guys ever heard of him? Okay, look him up after you're done today. He's an absolutely hilarious Christian comedian. Totally clean, hilarious, really funny. He has this joke that he tells. And the first time I heard it, we could not stop laughing for about 10 minutes because I totally identified with every part of the joke. So he's sitting there and he's talking about, yeah, you know, we're in church sometimes and you're sitting there, and same background. He grew up in a home that feared God, and so they went to church and that was their life. And he goes, man, you get these guys that come up there and they're talking about everything. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, man, this guy has an awesome testimony. I've got a horrible one. I wish I was addicted to crack. It's funny, right? I can totally relate because there would be times in church you'd hear these people come in, oh, they're out of the occult, they were in drugs, they this, that, the other, the worst of the worst, and you're going, I still don't have your testimony. And you get that mode of, man, I need to go through that so I can talk about the grace and the goodness of God. So this kind of rolls through my head, and my buddy Robert says to me, hey, why don't you come do prison ministry with me? No, you must have the wrong guy. This is not going in the prison. I can't relate. I don't look like I belong here. I'm going to get eaten up. There's no way. He said, no. Come with me to the prison. It's okay. No, Robert, I am not going to go to the prison with you. Yes, I see those guys need Jesus. They're just not my people. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. He goes, no, I'm going, besides which, what do I have to say that they're going to want to listen to? I haven't been caught for robbery. I haven't killed someone. I wasn't on drugs. None of this. Nothing that would get me into jail. He goes, you don't understand. Your testimony would probably be more powerful than anything we have to say. Because these guys know they've messed up. And most of them have kids, and they don't want their kids to make the same mistakes they did. I thought, and it's one of those moments. You know, it says in Proverbs that a word spoken in due season is like tasty apples or trifles that go down. They bring fatness and richness to the soul. They make you feel good. Well, that was a word in due season. I've been struggling with this. I don't really have a testimony. When people ask me, oh, who are you? Well, I do this. I do that. No. Who are you? I do this and I do that. And I was struggling with it. And he said, no, you have a testimony, and you have a powerful one. Because this is why people come to Christ. It's for the transformation of their life, transformation of their heart and their mind. They have seen something divine, and they've gotten a hold of it, and they said, I need this. And most of these people want their children to have the same thing. And so, kind of taking that word to heart, I said, man, all right, kind of cool. And so throughout life, I've always had this perspective of, okay, I'm kind of like a Joseph. I'm kind of like a David, although not nearly as muscular. I'm kind of like a Gideon, you know, because there are times where I'm absolutely terrified of what God's telling me to do, but I do it anyway after I've fleeced it 2 or 3 times. So, part of what I'm going to talk with you guys today is God has given me a vision, and He's given me a revelation about marketplace Christians. And I think that's part of the reason why I spoke at the other one. You know, growing up in church my whole life, you were taught that you weren't in the ministry unless you were involved in the 4 walls. If you were a prophet, evangelist, preacher, teacher, pastor, if you didn't fit one of those ministry callings, then you were still pursuing the call of God, but you weren't a minister. Now, you guys may not be able to relate with that, but if any of you guys are Foursquare, Episcopalian, Pentecostal, Charismatic, you have probably learned that in there. So, my pastor at about 15, 16 came to me and he said, Aaron, because we'd been talking, I said, oh, I'm called to be a pastor. That's in my heart. I've known that since I was 13. I'm called to be a pastor. He came to me and goes, no, I'm called to be a king. I got offended. I got mad. Because in my mind, no. If I'm fulfilling the call of God to really do God's work, I got to be the priest. I got to be the Levite. I got to be the guy carrying the ark. I can't be the guy fighting the fights to get it there. No. I'm a priest. He said, no, you're a king. Okay, what does that mean? So a couple of years this was rolling around, and I'm okay, and I kept struggling with it. I couldn't reconcile the two together because my heart said, you're a pastor, you're a priest. But my pastor, who I trust, is telling me, no, you're a king. And I'm like, what does this mean? Well, in Genesis, Abraham goes after his family is taken by raiders. They take his family, they take Lot, his nephew, they take everything. And they were out tending sheep, and they come back and they find all this stuff gone. So what does Abraham do? Woe is me, Lord God, I know you've got something in mind, you're going to fix this. I don't know how. I'm just going to sit here and wait, because you'll do it. No. It says he armed his servants. He took all the men of his household, armed them, and they went and they recovered his nephew and his family. They took back everything. Kind of funny, David has a similar story later on when the wives and the children are taken while they're at war, and they go back and they recover what? Everything. Not a single thing was lost. So anyway, he goes and he gets everything back. Well, when he comes back, who's there to meet him? Jesus. But you guys wouldn't know him by Jesus. His name is Melchizedek. Now, within the Bible, there are types and shadows. There are things which kind of give you the impression of what's to come later. Melchizedek was a very interesting individual. Melchizedek was not only the king of Salem, but he was also a priest of the Most High God. An office not held by a king ever. In fact, it was quite concise, especially under the Mosaic law, is the king was never the priest. You had the Levites, which are the priests, and you had the king. The two did not cross. They weren't allowed to. And in that moment, Melchizedek comes back and he says, blessed and favored are you, Abraham, for you've done this great thing. And he came to make an offering unto God for him. And Abraham is so grateful and so thankful that he turns around and he says, a tenth of what I have I'm going to give to you as a tithe, to show my appreciation. Now, Abraham, we think a tenth, all right, you know, the guy had some sheep, he had some people, tents, some stuff. No. When he gave him a tenth of what he owned, it's probably about $10 million worth of stuff. I don't know about you, but when I have to write that tithe check each month for 10% of my income, it's not an easy check to write. It's easy to get the church in there. Okay, now it's getting a little harder, and then, okay, here we go. And you do it. Abraham didn't even consider it. He let it go. He said, here you go, tenth of what I have, as unto God. Now, Melchizedek wanted to give him something in return. He said, no, I don't want it. because I don't want you to be able to lay claim to what God has done. God is the one who will enrich me. God is the one who gives me victory. God is the one who's done this for me. But the reason why any of that happened is because Abraham was obedient from the start. When God called to him from the burning bush, he responded. He said, in fact, it says in Genesis, literally, let me now turn aside and see why this bush does not burn. There's something prolific there. There's something very powerful there. I'm going to come back to it. So fast forward a little bit. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I'll come back to Jacob because Jacob's a pretty cool story. And then you have who? Joseph. Now Joseph, I don't ever want to identify myself as being Joseph. I'm not asking for those kinds of tests. But Joseph and I can relate with quite a bit. I have one sister, not 12 brothers. My sister hated me. We would fist fight during the summers. We would, one time we pulled out knives on one another. My sister hated me. If she had her way, I would have been in a pit, and then she would have sold me off to someone else. But in life, sometimes the calling of God comes with some friction, comes with some obstacles, comes with some challenges that you don't plan for. Now, in between, you're crying out, God, give me integrity, give me character, let me be like you. But the part you leave out of the prayer, which you should probably include, is, but I don't want to do it A, B, and C way. I'd rather skip all that and just give me what I need. By the way, God has a sense of humor. That's why he never answers that one. So Joseph, God calls Joseph. He says, I have a plan and I have a vision for you. Joseph goes and he shares it. What else are you going to do? God had planned something in you. You got to share it. There's just that burden there. So he goes to the best man he can think of, his father. He says, hey, Dad, guess what? God's given me this vision. Now, he'd already told his brothers and he told his mother. His brothers said, you're nuts. Forget it. No way that's ever going to happen. His mom said, I don't know. But his dad, you mean to say that your mother and I are going to bow down to you? That would be like, for us, the equivalency would be like when the president comes in the room, he sits and we stand. It just doesn't happen. It's a complete role reversal. It's actually dishonoring. And so Joseph says, look, this is all I got to say. Is God showed me my sheep was standing, yours were all bowing down. I don't know what that means. Got to share it. But he kept it. Jacob said, okay. Maybe there's something to this. I already wrestled with God and lost. I got this limp to prove it. So I'm not going to be too hasty this time. So he considers it. So now Joseph's thinking, okay, I got this great plan. God's going to do something with me. What's the first thing that happens? His brothers fake his death and throw him in a pit. They wanted to kill him. Step one on the ladder. I'm moving on up in the world, aren't I? I'm moving up by going down. So after that, he gets sold into slavery because they say, we can't kill him. It wouldn't be right. We just don't want him around. So they sell him off. Meanwhile, Joseph's going, okay, this just keeps getting better. Rung number 2, here we go. Up the ladder we go. So then he gets put into Potiphar's house. Now Potiphar, being the captain of the guard for Pharaoh, I mean, he's the general. He's the dude that if you want to live in a house, you're going to live in his house because you know it's not going to burn up or get messed with and you're going to be okay. But Potiphar's wife didn't have the same plan for Joseph. She had a different plan. Now she was attracted to the call of God in this guy's life. It says he was good looking, he was well educated, he was knowledgeable, and she found that attractive. Funny how when Jesus gets inside, even though the outward doesn't change too much, funny how all of a sudden people are like, hey. So her plan results in his third rung up the ladder. Here we go. Now I go to prison. While in prison, of course, he meets the cupbearer and the baker, who the king got upset with. So instead of just beheading them right there, he says, I'm going to throw them in prison. Let me think about what I'm going to do to them first. While they're there, they both have dreams. Now, interesting. You have a man who's responding to the call of God in his life. He's excited about it. He's not a man absent of integrity or character. He didn't get wrapped up with the wrong crowd, and that's the reason why he's in prison. This is a guy who's followed the call of God in his life. And yet he's in prison. Does Joseph complain? Does he whine about it? Does he start throwing a fit, telling God what he deserves? By the way, don't ever do that. Don't ever talk to God about what you deserve. Thank him for not giving you what you deserve. So he's sitting there, and these two are distraught, and they're freaking out. They're already on the chopping block anyway, but now it's even worse because they've got this crazy weird dream that they don't know how to make sense of. And Joseph says, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Don't dreams and their interpretations belong to God? God did this for a reason. Now we look at that circumstance and we think, oh, okay, well, it was to exalt Joseph. Well, it was also to kind of tell them too. So Joseph interprets, says, oh, but when you get out of here, please don't forget me. Don't forget me. And just in case you've already forgotten, don't forget me. When you get up there and you're back to work, tell Pharaoh, hey, there's this guy. You got to let him out of prison. He's a decent guy. So the dreams come true, just as he said. One of them gets killed, the other one gets put back in his position. And he what? Forgets about Joseph. I don't know about you. There have been times where I've listened to God, I've followed through on what he said, and I'm like, God, did you just forget about me? You told me to do this, and like all of a sudden I'm standing here knee deep in water going, this is supposed to be a beach. Why am I in the water? So, Joseph, instead of complaining about it, okay. Now, interesting thing. God's favor never left Joseph. Never. It never did. While he was in Potiphar's house, he was the captain of all the servants. When he was in prison, the warden didn't even ask him what was going on. The warden went to him and said, hey, what are you doing today? He had free reign. God's favor. So he gets out of prison 2 years after he interprets the dreams. And he gets out under the most unusual set of circumstances. Pharaoh has a dream and he doesn't understand what it means, and he's freaked out. And all of his crazy sorcerers and his diviners can't figure it out, and they know, hey, if we don't get this thing right, I'm going to be losing weight the easy way. So they say, this thing you're asking can't be done. Like, we can't, this is too complex. And the cupbearer is reminded. Now, if you've forgotten for 2 years, how is he to remember something that you've forgotten for 2 years? It's pretty much not going to happen. God divinely intercedes and reminds him, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute. And so he says, oh my goodness, my foolishness is revisiting me today. I totally forgot. There's this guy, he'll totally tell you the answer, because the same thing happened to us. And it came out true, because here I am standing before you. I could just imagine Pharaoh's look on his face like, really? I've been agonizing for 7 days and you couldn't tell me this on Monday? You had to wait until Saturday? So he calls him up. And the first thing Joseph says, now Joseph knows where he is. He knows who he is in the sight of these people. And he knows that one misstep will cost him his entire life. I don't know about you, but it's pretty difficult to follow the call of God in my life when I'm staring at the firing end of the weapon and there's a human being behind it. But he doesn't even blink. He gets cleaned up, he presents himself, and he says, look, the thing you're asking for is easy if you're asking the right person. It's not up to me. The answer I gave your cupbearer didn't come from me, it came from God. It came from the Most High God, the only God. And I will go and I'll ask him. And if he decides to answer, great. If not, then I don't care. Because I'm not going to make it up. And so he goes and he asks God, hey, what's the interpretation? God gives it to him. And what happens? The calling that Joseph had had 20 years before that almost, that sent him to the pit, into slavery, into prison, has now set him to the right hand of the king. Now Pharaoh was considered a god, little g. But to the Egyptians, he was the big G. So for Joseph, a Hebrew, a despised race, a person that they would more assume to spit on than they would to help, was now second to Pharaoh because of our God. So now, jump forward to David and Saul. I'm building something here in case you guys haven't noticed. I'm building something here. Saul was a man who was faithful to his father's work. Much like Elijah, he was doing his dad's duty. When the call of God came, Instead of Elisha had burned everything and left it behind when Elijah called him. Saul went and hid. Now the reason why this story is really, really important is because up and until Saul, there had only been kings over Israel. There had only been judges, no kings over Israel whatsoever. So there was no president, prime minister, king, pharaoh. There was none of that. They went to God, and then if they had a dispute, they went to judges. And typically God had a prophet or two that would speak on his behalf to bring clarity. So Israel falls into, they basically start backsliding, all right? In their backsliding state, they cry out and they say, we want a king like the other nations do. They had compromised who they were. They refused to accept what God had done. And the result was, now they wanted to be like everyone else. And they turn around and they say, no, we want a king over us like the other nations have. And we want it now. And so Samuel is distraught. He's upset. He's going, God, what is with your people? Sound familiar? Moses had the same complaint too. God, what's with your people? Are you kidding me? And he goes, no, give them what they want. I'll give them the desire of their heart. Be careful what you guys ask for. You know, these days we don't have a prophet to go and appoint a king. We get to vote. Be careful what you ask for. So they gave him a king after their own heart. That was Saul. Now we all know the story of Saul. Saul, handsome dude, taller than anybody else, was a warrior. God anoints him like he had not done for anybody else except for the prophets. He actually prophesied with the prophets, which was a big deal. But Saul didn't have the character. And so when the pressure would come, Saul would fold. Probably the most crowning failure on Saul's entire history. They're in a fight. They're in a war. And Samuel gives them very clear directions from God. If you want to win this war, if you want to win this battle, you've got to wait for me to come. And I have to make an offering, and then you guys can go fight. So, they're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting. The general, every day. Hey, we're going to go to war. Are we going to go to war today? How about today? How about today? No, we got to wait for Samuel. We got to wait for Samuel. After a couple of days, he starts to cave. He goes, well, heck, I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. I'll make the offering, then we'll go to war. So he goes over and he makes the offering, and they go out to war and they lose. And Samuel shows up. What are you doing? Well, you know, we were waiting. You didn't show up. And the people kept pressuring. And you know these people. You know how these people can be. I mean, they start coming to the tent every single day. They're hammering on me. Come on. We want to go to war. We want to go to war. So fine. I just get what they want. We went to war. And he goes, come on. What are you doing? You can't do this. So instead of losing everything right there, God gives him a second chance. Like he does many of us. So they're in another war. And God says, okay, you're going to kill everything. Don't take a single thing for yourselves. You're going to kill every person. You're going to kill every animal. You're going to level the place. I want stones on the ground, no two on top of one another. That's what your job is. So they go into battle, and of course they win. And they begin to go through. And the men start going, well, wait a minute. God doesn't really want us to, this is some good stuff. This is some really good stuff. Why would God want us to throw away perfectly good stuff? That would be a waste. And God's not about waste. And not only that, we can take some of this stuff and give it back to God. Let's do that. Yeah, that's a great idea. So they begin to do this. And so I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't God like a tip today? Why wouldn't he like a reward? You know why? He gave us the victory. Let's give him a little something. And Samuel comes back, and he meets with them on the field. And he looks Saul straight dead in the eye. He says, what have you done? No, it's these people. It's not me. It's these people. He goes, no. This is you. Why am I hearing sheep in my ears? Why am I hearing them making noises? What were your instructions? Well, to kill everything. Why didn't you do it? The people. The people. They pressured me. He said, no. He says, you know what, you're done. And Saul's so distraught, he falls down and he grabs at his robe and he tears it. And Samuel says, just as you've torn my robe, so has God torn the kingdom from your hand this day. You're done. Now the interesting thing is God didn't physically remove him for another 20 years. He used Saul to shape David. So, David. David is a man who is so underwhelming that his own family forgets who he is. All right, it's time for another king. God sends Samuel on a mission. He sends him to the right place. He shows up. There's all this whole family here, and they're going through one by one. No, not it. You got any more kids? Yeah. I got another boy. He's out in the field, but he's like a couple miles away. He'll probably get here tomorrow morning, but you don't care about him. I mean, he's the youngest. He's insignificant. No, we'll wait. In fact, we're not going to eat. We'll just wait. Why don't you go get him? So David comes in, and God says, right, that's your man. Right there. That's your man. Now, interesting thing about David. David was not a convert. David was not someone of ill character. David was born a Jew. He was within the lineage of Christ, we learn. But David, of his own free will, developed a relationship with God. And while he would be weeks on end out in the middle of fields, far away from home, he would take that time to talk with God, to minister to him, to get to know God. There's something powerfully ingrained in his heart. Now here's the thing. It says that Jesse, his father, was a devout and righteous man. I don't know about you, my kids don't just do things without learning somewhere. They don't randomly pick them when they go down. I'm an astrophysicist. I figured out how to calculate the trajectory of a rocket. No, we're going to go to school for the next 50 years, and then you can figure that out and tell me how it's done. So Jesse had seen within his own family's existence, hey, God is important. He's to be honored, and this is the way we live. But David hooked into something special. Now, when I was 19, I got married at 21. A little part of my story, at 17 I enlisted in the Army. I wanted to become a doctor. And so I enlisted in the Army to get some of the education out of the way, get some experience. At 21, my wife and I got married, and we had our first child 11 months later. And kind of a neat story, my wife and I knew we were going to get married to one another because God both gave us the name of our son, independent of one another. And we started talking one night. She says out of the blue, hey, you know what name I've always liked? In fact, I want to name my son this is Asher. And God had just told me the week before, we're reading through it, and he says, that's going to be the name of your son. And I shelf it. I don't know what that means. That's my little thing. Like, if I don't know what something means that God is telling me, I put it on the shelf to grab it later. So I said, shelved it, just didn't think anything more of it. She says that, and my jaw drops. I'm like, she goes, what? Being young and stupid, I can't tell you. 20 minutes later, we were driving out to Coronado just talking because we're like, okay, this is it, we're getting married. In that experience, there are lots of opportunities to listen to God or not. And where the foundation starts, and the power of the testimonies of people who have gone through horrific things, is that they took advantage of the opportunity when God called their name. So at 15, 16, actually, I'm sorry, no, I was 20, 21, a little bit later. My wife and I, we just moved into an apartment, and we took over management of the building, and I was in my son's room, and I was talking to my friend who has a very strong prophetic gift. And Bill had been like a father to my wife and I for years, and just an amazing man, very, very humble guy. And he had called me, and we were chatting about some things. And as we were talking, God dropped a vision in my heart, like in a 30 second, boom, there and over. And the vision was, I was walking out. I grew up in San Diego. I don't know if any of you guys are from San Diego, but La Jolla is beautiful. But La Jolla has a very specific type of geography. And so you have all these shops along the cove, and then you have some walking trails that go down, and it's very beautiful, but it's very like, you know, you're in La Jolla. And so what it dropped in my heart is I had a vision. I'm walking down this path, and I know where I am. Now, La Jolla is a very expensive city. There's a lot of money there, and we're talking a lot of money. The homes are $20, $30 million as a fixer. There's a lot of affluence, a lot of very important and significant people live there. Some of the world's best scientists live there. And so I knew where I was. And I'm walking down this path, and as I'm walking down the path, these palm trees kept falling over my path. Falling down. I mean, like 20, 30-foot palm trees, just boom, boom. But they weren't slowing me down. What does this mean? And so I'm talking to my friend a little bit later, and I just said, Bill, man, I had this thing happen. God dropped this in my heart, but I have no clue what it means. And being a really good friend, he says, well, go read the Bible, figure it out. Okay. He did it for a specific reason, though. It turned out later, because when you take time to do that, you really get it. And so I wanted to know what the palm trees meant. I had no clue what palm trees meant. So I learned palm trees were found within the courtyards of the kings. They were a stately tree. They're a what do they call it? It's a royal tree. In most countries, like the palace would be surrounded by emperor palms or queen palms, and these are magnificent trees, and they're well respected. So I knew that meant power, influence, and affluence. And so what God had told me as I began to research was, the path that I'm calling you to go on, people of affluence and influence are going to fall across your path. And you're going to have the opportunity to interact with them, to impact them, to affect them, to bring my word and a knowledge of who I am to them. But it's not going to slow you down. So I look back, okay, when I read 1 Timothy, there's a point where Paul is talking to Timothy and he's encouraging him. Timothy was a young pastor of a huge church. He was so stressed out about getting ulcers. And so Paul is writing to him, he's encouraging him, he's saying, look, don't forget, don't neglect, don't put aside this gift that you have of faith. And I know you have it because where'd you get it from? I laid my hands on you and prayed that you have it. Because that same gift dwelt in your mother. I've never been drunk. I've never been addicted to drugs. I tried marijuana one time, and God made sure I never want to touch anything again. I didn't go to my first party until I was 19. Never set foot in a club until I was 18 because I was the designated driver of a bunch of my Army buddies. I didn't live a life of craziness. At 12, I was on the worship team. At 14, I became the primary drummer for our church and then stayed there for the next 11 years. You know, God allowed me to do a lot of really cool things. You know, I got to work with a Christian band for about 4 years. And we toured and the whole nine, produced albums and the whole nine, and then I got to play with them a couple of times. Amazing opportunities, and I can tell you one thing, had I not had a heart which sought God, and had my parents not sown the seeds of faith, those opportunities probably wouldn't have been there. I mean, I could probably spend hours talking about all the cool things that God has done, and I'll tell you one thing, following God is exciting. And it's a whole lot better than regretting things. So, within all of this, the reason why I talked about Saul, and I talked about David, and I talked about Joseph, these were all men who inherited a legacy from the decisions their parents made. Their parents made a decision. They decided to change their lives. They accepted what God was doing, and they wanted to be part of it. And the response was their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren were all blessed. They all got the benefit of that legacy. Now today, at 25, I was able to start my own company. We went multi-million-dollar in our first 2 years. I had 4 offices in 3 states. I had about 35 employees. In my field of work, the average age for the person doing my job is about 55. It doesn't happen. God hooked me up with a heathen to get there. And I say that because sometimes falling to call of God will put you in prison. Sometimes it puts you in the house of Potiphar. Sometimes it makes you wait a couple of years longer than you think you're going to have to wait to get out. But as long as you're patient, as long as you have the right attitude, as long as you're looking at it as an opportunity to exercise in your character and to develop and grow and become more Christ-like, it will always benefit. I want to finish with this. In the song this morning, there was a fantastic verse in the Desert Song. This is my prayer in the fire, in weakness or trial or pain, of more worth than gold, so refine me, Lord, through the flame. Throughout the Bible, you see this imagery about a refiner's fire. Now, every day you will have opportunities. You'll hit a fork in the road. Do I make this decision or do I make that decision? One is better than the other, although both may be right. One will build your faith and put you one step closer to God's purpose in your life, or one will kind of take you a little bit further away from that. You have these opportunities. Now, the call of God on your life does not involve ministry with only in the four walls of the church. If we're in a printing company, I would argue very strongly that these guys are fulfilling the call of their life that God has placed there, and that they are ministering effectively. They're probably doing more good here than some churches are. Absolutely. God needs marketplace Christians. So as I began to go through my own life with these things coming up, God kept bringing back the refiner's fire, refiner's fire, refiner's fire. And there's one thing I learned. Jesus, being the Son of God, without fault and without sin, felt that. And God decided, his Father said, you know, you're going to take 30 years of waiting for a 3.5-year ministry. And then I'm going to kill you at the end of it. 30 years of preparation, of training, of patience, of trials. Because it says that he's been tempted in all points as we were, yet was without sin. So every single thing you face, every pressure you face, every obstacle that comes up, every dynamic decision that you will encounter, Christ has already seen the same thing. And instead of choosing to the left, he chose to the right. Every single time. He didn't have any special advantage. God said, no, that would be unfair. I'm going to take away your godlike powers. I'm going to let you live as a man. You have to make the same decisions they did, with the same pressures they have, with the same sin nature they have. Go figure it out. So he did it. So the way I see it is if God felt it appropriate to take 30 years for a 3.5-year ministry, I'm well good till I'm 50. 50, 60, maybe 70, then we'll start rolling through this thing. But that doesn't mean that I'm wasting time. Now my character, my influence, my knowledge of who God is and in the Word has increased more in fulfilling the call in my life, which is to serve within my marketplace as a marketplace leader, exemplifying Christ, than it would if I would have taken the other route and just gone and worked in the church. Think about it. It's the perfect environment. You're surrounded by sinners, day in and day out. You don't get away from them. They're going to come to you. You have a private service that brings you two together, so you have mutual ground. You don't have to worry about awkward moments of, you want to come to Jesus? Oh, not ready yet? No. You already have a rapport built. And at the end of it, you're a respected leader a lot of times. You know, I've seen what Paul's done here with this company and what you guys are doing consistently. You guys are leaders within the community. You're well respected. This company is sought after by other companies specifically for the quality of work. That's God's favor. That's what God's doing. God does the same thing with you. There's a fantastic book called The Day of the Saints, and it's by Bill Hybel. I would suggest reading it. It's a little thick. But he talks about the necessity God has placed on marketplace Christians today. The missionary work that's going on right now, the evangelism that's occurring is in the marketplace. It's not in the four walls of the church anymore. It's not necessarily going to the nations only. God wants to change his people's heart here. He's on a timeline now. There's things moving. There's things going on. And God does not want a single person to go by the wayside simply because we're stuck in our mode of thinking that, well, the only way I can really reach them is if I have this title of pastor or preacher or teacher or evangelist. I need to go through and get to here in order to be effective. No. If you're a mechanic, you're effective. Do what you do to the best of your ability. That honors God. That provides the opportunities. Because it says what? Your gift will make room for you, right? So if you're really good at something, it's going to make an opportunity for God to use that. So, in following this plan that God's kind of laid out for me, I'm a respected leader within my community, especially among young professionals. I've been very fortunate to start several small young professional organizations that have grown. I teach within my own industry. I'm actually considered an expert in some areas, which is very flattering, especially considering the experience these people have over me. And God, in between all of that, allows me to run my company in a way where He's glorified.
That's good.
People aren't challenged by that. They aren't intimidated. They aren't afraid. You know, I lost a very key player yesterday. She up and quit for what I'd say selfish reasons. But God's got her hand on her. We've been praying for her. If people don't share your values, you need to show them why they should. You need to walk in that love. You need to walk in that holiness of character. Doesn't mean that you're perfect. It means that you're righteous. There's a difference. It means that you're in right standing. You're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. Just do it forward. You know what, God? I messed this one up. I've done it plenty of times. I had one of those moments yesterday when we're looking at it going, God, I know I have some fault in this. So show me. I know I'm not completely without fault in this decision. I could have done this better. I could have been a better leader here. I make the best decisions I can at the times they come up. But the most important thing is that guidance of the Holy Spirit, that little check in your heart, that peace. When you have that opportunity, I'm making that decision. Do I have peace with this or do I have more peace with this? Unless we follow, you pursue your peace. You know, God needs marketplace Christians. God needs people like me. They need people like you. Just doing what you do and doing it well. And stepping outside the box and saying, you know what, God? You've called me to be a Joseph. You've called me to be a David. You've called me to be an Abraham. Some of you will be millionaires. Some of you won't be. You will all be effective. So that's what I had to share this morning.